Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Cool. Ryan, you sound a little quiet. Did he sound quiet to you as well?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, that's
that's a
better.
lot better.
Cool, cool. All right. All right. Hello. Ooh, we can't hear you, I don't think.
Nope.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Howdy.
Okay. So I think, is your audio working? Dr.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, we can hear Dr. McGurko. Is that right pronunciation?
Yep.
All right. And then Bryant and Kelly are both good to go.
And
Yeah,
it turns
okay.
out that I will not have to leave at 7, so
Oh, okay.
90 minutes. So
I will be turning my video off fairly often. This is during my family's dinner time, so I'll be eating dinner when I'm
Sure.
not. Yeah.
Sure thing. Just pull up my questions.
Corey, we cannot hear you if you're trying to figure that out. We cannot hear you. I guess he's just going to leave. All right.
Oh, that's what the extra 5 minutes is for, I guess.
mhm.
Hmm.
You guys see that the fraternity count doubled today from yesterday? Yeah.
Yeah.
we're at UGA. We're still flying in the fucking dark. So
Yeah, I heard.
Well, from what I've been told, the less testing you do, the fewer cases you have.
exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I
I
know
honestly wish Georgia Tech was doing similar, because I mean, we're just getting all these cases from the testing.
there's still a couple of sororities and fraternities that have been telling their members not to report cases. So after that gets handled, I think we'll see a big increase as well.
Is that at UGA?
That's at Georgia Tech.
So there are fraternities telling their members not to report cases so they don't get shut down, or not to get tested, basically, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there have been some that have received positive cases, and they're not reporting the cases either.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Any chance? Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. Thank y'all for your patience.
How do you pronounce your last name exactly?
It's Gergen.
Gergen. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Gergen.
Is that Swedish?
It's German.
German. That was my second guess.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just, at exactly 6, we'll just start it. And I think all the attendees will be able to filter in at that point. Okay, 6 o'clock. Oops.
Totally fine waiting a few minutes for more than one attendee, to be fair.
Yeah. Okay, so that's me. Did I not do it right? Oh, I see. There we go. Got it, got it. Yeah, we can wait like 1 or 2 minutes just to see if more people filter in. All right. Okay, well, it is 6:02, so I think we should just go ahead and get started. This will be recorded, so people who missed the beginning will be able to watch that portion that they missed. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the People Over Profits Town Hall event. We are discussing the dangers of privatization at this event, and in particular, how those issues have come to light during COVID. So the goal of this event is to provide, important information to not just the Georgia Tech community, but also, all USG schools and staff and students about how kind of the USG makes their decisions and whose interests they really are taking into account. So let's move into introductions. So I'll go first. My name is Jake Churchill. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a second year undergraduate student at Georgia Tech, and I'm also a co-chair on the education committee at YDSA Georgia Tech. Oh, and by the way, YDSA stands for Young Democratic Socialists of America. So my role at this event will essentially be to moderate and facilitate the question asking. So who wants to introduce themselves next? Kelly, you're first on my thing, so why don't you go?
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Kelly O'Neill. I use she, hers pronouns, and I am a fourth year business administration major here at Georgia Tech. I've been involved in student government for 3 years and am now involved as the advocacy manager for the Residence Hall Association. But yeah, I think a big part of me being here is related to some FOIA documents that I received and things like that. So I will pass it on to the next person.
I'll go. I'm Brian McGurko. I'm faculty here at Georgia Tech. I've been here for about 13 years. And I'm in the School of LMC. I'm also appointed in interactive computing and psychology. And I've been pretty vocal about my thoughts on this, whether or not the return to campus or how safe it is, I suppose.
I'll jump in next. So I am Bryant Barnes. I'm a PhD student in history at UGA, although I did get my undergrad degree in economics and international affairs from Georgia Tech. So just to demonstrate my credentials, I don't know if you guys can see, but that's a bulldog wearing a Tech Letterman jacket with Hell with Georgia. beneath. And I still think to hell with Georgia, and I think particularly I feel that sentiment today, although I think that a lot of folks at Tech are also not too excited about what's going on.
Hi, I'm Corey Gergen. I'm a Britton Fellow in the Writing and Communication program, which means that my primary job at Tech is to teach first-year writing. I'm kind of the inverse of Bryant because I went to UGA before coming to Georgia Tech, but I won't get into like to hell with Georgia Tech or anything. I know the audience here. And I guess I'm here as well because I've been fairly outspoken about USG and Georgia Tech's plans, both on Twitter and now recently. I and some of my colleagues in the WCP have started a podcast where we're kind of investigating not just Georgia Tech and USG, but kind of higher ed more broadly, how they're responding to the COVID pandemic. And that's just called Residential Spread. And I hope you'll check it out.
All right, that's awesome intros. So I'm just going to say a few things about the structure of the event really quick. So the first portion, third to half, I'm going to ask some pre-selected questions that I kind of wrote up that hit on the most important topics that we want to cover here. And then after we finish that, we'll move into audience questions. So to the audience members, please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions because I won't really be looking in the chat. So try to use that and I'll ask your questions to the panelists, reading them off from the Q&A. Let's see, and like I said earlier, this event will be recorded and posted on the YDSA YouTube account. So with that, I think I'm just going to move right into first question, which I believe, yes. Okay, so kind of the inspiration for this event or the triggering event was when the documents relating to Corvius were released and became public, and it highlighted the problems of privatization in the face of COVID. So what exactly is Corvius? How did the controversial documents become public, and why were those documents so troubling? And I think Kelly should take this question first.
Yeah, I can take that. So I'll start off with just how these documents were obtained. So I submitted an open records request against the USG, specifically Chancellor Wrigley, a couple of months ago now, to try to get more insight as to why they had made the decision not to allow University System of Georgia universities to require masks. So back then we were still having that huge debate over the Masks for USG movement, things like that, and we're seeing a lot of momentum happening. So, we heard from some people that it was Board of Regents' decision. We heard from others that it was a university decision. I was really just trying to get clarification on who was making those decisions and why they were making them the way that they were. And took about a month for me to get the response back with all the documents, and this Corvius document was included in that. At first, reading through it didn't pop out too much, but then reading a little bit deeper into it, it became clear that a lot of discussion was happening surrounding whether the Board of Regents was allowed to send students back home in the spring due to their public-private contracts that they had with Corvius. So essentially what Corvius does is they are a housing company. They build housing. They set up these private partnerships. Some other people might be able to talk a little bit more about this than I can. But they set up these partnerships, in our case specifically with the University System of Georgia, built residence halls for some of our universities. And then in order to help pay off these residence halls, they are using the money obtained through student housing fees, essentially. So really the argument that's happening is, was the university system allowed to send students home because now Corvius is not receiving the money that they should have been receiving due to that contract saying that's how they receive their funding.
There's a little bit of history there in terms of Corvius buying debt that the university system had. I honestly, maybe somebody else on the panel can remembers more details about that, but there was essentially a swap for debt in order for Corvias to have a pretty sweet contract. Was it 65 years? I think 60. Yeah. I'd like my contract to be for 65 years with Tech as well. One thing to point out at GT, Corvias doesn't own buildings on all of the system's campuses. However, since we are monolithically controlled, the institution that's being pressured by Corvias is the one that makes decisions for us just as much as for UGA or KSU or wherever. I also want to point out that I hope folks don't think this is the only economic pressure on the Board of Regents and on the state. I honestly wasn't really that affected by the Corvias news, because it was just, yeah, okay, this is zero surprise, right? We're clearly not being motivated by health and science, and there are only so many other things that are kind of obvious left over, right? And money is a clear driver behind the decisions here. I for one would love to know what other pressures are being exerted that we're not even aware of at the moment, especially at, since I'm here at the Georgia Tech level, but at the state as well.
I'll jump in really quickly. So yeah, you're right. It was a 65-year deal, valued back in 2014 at about $517 million. And yes, essentially what Corvias did was the university system kind of transferred about $300 million of public debt to Corvias's balance sheets, and that kind of helped out USG in building some of these new housing units on several campuses, and kind of shifted some financial liabilities off of its balance sheets. And in exchange, Corvias got this sweet deal. Students were constantly kind of coming in to get degrees, and there was never really any problem filling housing units, filling beds. And then COVID hit, and Corvias just decided to send the USG a friendly little letter saying that we might be concerned that we're concerned that you might actually kind of take the health and safety of students, and that might affect our bottom line. USG will say that, or has said that their decisions have no relation to this letter or any other financial responsibilities with other companies. But at Georgia Tech, there's like Sodexo and Aramark, which folks might be familiar with like dining services, stuff like that. So universities have been, for the past several decades, been kind of transitioning and pushing services that universities provide onto private companies, which sometimes helps, but it's not always in the best interest of students, especially when it comes to public health issues.
Yeah, and just one other wrinkle on the Corvias deal that I think is worth pointing out is that one of the things that made the deal viable for Corvias was a 2014 statewide referendum. And it's one of these things that Georgia loves to do, which is they put these sort of innocuous looking phrases on the ballot sheet. And it's worded in some way that you couldn't possibly think it was a bad idea, but then it winds up opening up the door for all kinds of things. And this one basically allows Corvias to operate as landlords on these 9 campuses tax-free, essentially. Just this sort of huge boon for whatever company wound up winning the bid, which wound up being Corvias. It was pretty quick that the USG decided on the bid. The other thing, I mean, for me, that troubled me about Corvias, I saw Kelly's tweet and I started digging into the document. I think maybe, Kelly, you even tweeted like, hey, look at this document about core bias. And I started reading it and it was sort of upsetting. And then I Googled core bias and I saw that they didn't start doing campus housing. They started doing military housing. And, you know, I grew up in a military
housing.
Yes, well, so I grew up in a military family, and we didn't live in military housing, but we lived close enough to it for most of my childhood that I knew this was bad news. There are not many good companies that are in privatized military housing, and this is the case. I mean, this is it seems like core bias is about to go in front of the Congress again over this, but they've been there before over sort of basically running slums on military bases.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my second wave of horror. And then the third was I got to where Brian was, which is that I don't think that core bias really influenced the decision because they didn't have to. And I think the same kind of priorities that lead to this kind of deal also lead to the decisions that USG has been making since April, really since March, right? That you don't enter a deal with this kind of group unless you're willing to maximize profits in student housing.
Yeah, I definitely just learned some things right now. I did not know all that background on core bias or the tax exemptions or all of that. So kind of moving to the next question. This is kind of directed at Bryant a little bit because I listened to a webinar that he was a part of put on by United's campus workers. And, USG has, cited that, it's very expensive to close down campuses and that it really wouldn't be financially feasible for them to do that. But Bryant's done some research that kind of puts that into question. So I'd like for you to share that. And then if anyone else has thoughts, they can jump in.
So I think we've already kind of touched on the extent to which kind of private interests have kind of infiltrated and inserted themselves into the public sector in many ways, whether that's the military or higher education. But when you think about the Board of Regents, who are ultimately making these decisions about reopening, and they're the ones who are going to make the decision on whether or not schools close down. Most likely, since they have kind of emphasized the unity of the system, it's not really going to matter how bad things get on one particular campus. They are going to make a decision system-wide. So it's going to be one or all schools that shut down. I would be happy to be wrong in that case, but the evidence that the president at UGA recently said was that when asked the simple question of what kinds of factors will result in the transition to online, so a positivity rate, deaths, he said that decision is more of a qualitative one rather than a quantitative one. So it's clear that health and safety isn't the first priority. And one of the things that makes this clear is that university presidents, I'm sure Georgia Tech's president has said similar things, but they will say, we have to collect student fees, we have to collect tuition, we have to collect these fees, because if we don't, we're going to have to lay folks off. So that's one thing. They're trying to kind of say that this is about jobs. And in a way it is, but United Campus Workers of Georgia and several other folks have been kind of calling consistently for not only safer campuses and safer reopening plans, guaranteed pay if we do transition to remote. And if we have to refund fees, how are we going to make that work? And just to kind of give you an idea is of how these universities are being more and more run more and more like businesses, is that when it comes to financial crises, to downturns and budget shortfalls, stuff like that, the first thing they always go to is laying folks off. There's no, like, the idea of chop from the top. We have presidents who are making nearly $1 million a year. I was just looking at a 990 form for the UGA Foundation, which UGA's president is an ex officio kind of trustee of, and he gets another 600,000 just for being on that board. So none of this is even on their radar, at least seemingly as a viable option for cutting costs. The Board of Regents are quote unquote volunteers. They're appointed by the governor, and many of you are aware of the governor's stance on public health, government funding, public services. And these folks got appointed by the governor because of their business ties, their political ties to the governor's campaigns or the previous governor's campaigns, depending on which regent you're talking about. And the USG is meant to run like a business. So as folks have already said, this is the main goal is to cut costs, and the costs that are always the first thought of, or usually the only thought of, are the costs of labor. And if you listen, they haven't really heard anything, or they haven't said anything about hazard pay. They aren't interested when you bring that up. And it's one thing. So just since this is kind of geared towards the Georgia Tech folks, the chairman of the Board of Regents, Sakin Shailendra, he has a company called SG Consulting or SG Construction. I think there are several different SG groups. And SG Construction was involved in the building of McCamish Pavilion, several other buildings on Georgia Tech's campus. So it's kind of, it's never really clear, but there are definitely conflicts of interest that these private companies that board members, that regents are on, are benefiting from their position on the Board of Regents. And there's shady folks as well. Sakin Shailendra has been banned from like financial securities industry as part of kind of a settlement agreement with a family company back in like 2011. So I think before he was actually on the board, his family's company was sued for essentially running a real estate Ponzi scheme. They settled out of court, so there's no official judicial decision saying that, but one former member of the board was just recently convicted of, I think, racketeering. So these are shady folks, and the one of the current members, who is the president of Synovus Bank, was also involved in the recently convicted former regent, was involved in that kind of scheme, that racketeering scheme. So that's just a brief kind of, well, maybe not brief, but an idea of who's calling the shots here. And I think why, I don't know if Tech has been like this, but UGA has been very quick to say, we don't have money for this, this, and this. But when you say, we're not so certain about the quality of the reopening plans and the measures that you've implemented, they say, oh yeah, we've spent $6 million. It's like, we don't have money, but look at all this money that we've spent on insufficient safety plans.
If no one else wants to add on to that,
Uh,
go ahead.
Oh, I was saying no. Sorry.
Oh. Okay. Well, I think the next question kind of connects to that is like, are the interests of student faculty and staff being served in the USG's decision-making process? And I kind of want to see, what y'all's personal perspective is as faculty and students, but then also just looking at what their decision-making process is. So whoever wants that, go ahead.
Kelly, you want to go?
Yeah, I can start us off on this one. My short answer is gonna be a no. I think we all expected that. But really, I think at almost every level of decision making, whether it's university level, system level, whatever, at least on the student side, we're not seeing a lot of student input being considered. If it is being considered, it's student government and it's one or two people consistently. And one or two people is not representative of the entire student body, no matter how good you are. And I think really that's where my concerns start. It's definitely not where they end. But I think consistently we're seeing that the decisions being made are being made for the purposes of running universities like a business, making sure that we're upholding our end of contracts, whether they be housing, dining, whatever related. And I do think that's an interesting topic as well, the housing, transportation, dining contracts, all of that, because I've been in talks on both the dining and the transportation side with RFPs. And there's a lot to unpack there. There really is. So yeah, I think really, they talk about how they're prioritizing student health, student safety. But if that were the case, then the fact that we're seeing spikes on campuses right now would lead them to be making decisions differently, or would have led them to say, oh crap, this isn't working. What should we be doing now that we haven't been doing? But I was on one of the task forces a couple months ago, the campus services task force that Georgia Tech had. And I brought up, I said, we should be expecting that people are going to break the rules. If we're going to have rules, we need to have ways to enforce them. And neither of those concerns was addressed. And I think that's something we're consistently seeing, is that at least on the student side and the student leadership side, we're bringing up these very big concerns and these things, and we're pointing them out. Another place I've seen this has been with football games. I know a student who has been very heavily advocating for the fact that we should not be having people in the stadiums at football games, but has been consistently pushed off to the side. So a lot of times we are being told that we have a voice in these conversations, but at the end of the day, we're seeing that our voices aren't really being listened to or being considered, and not really leading to much actionable change. So yeah, my short answer is no, not really. I don't think student health and safety is being prioritized. I do think it is other things, primarily financial things first, but I would be interested to hear what faculty members are thinking on y'all's end.
So I've had a meeting with a good handful of upper administrators over the past month as a representative of the UCWGA at the Georgia Tech Campus Workers Union. And the $50,000 is one of the reasons that we're told, we got to go back. We got to go back. We got to go back. The other one, and I don't know if you guys know this, is that the students really want to be there. That is something that I've been told emphatically, is that the students they want to be there. So of course we should let them be there, I guess. And also as a sweetener, I'm also told that everybody's going to play by the rules and that everyone will follow the guidelines. Right. I mean, it sounds nice. Like I would love to be in a Star Trekian utopia where we're all here sort of supporting each other and our society is really working towards our own advancement, but we're not there yet. I trust, students with their health decisions as much as I trust faculty and their ethics decisions in this situation right now. It's all over the place, right? And we're all doing what we think is best. And we live in are we still the #1 state in the country? A couple of days ago we were per capita, right? This doesn't feel like the right place to be testing out our resolve as a community. So to answer your question, the answer is no, but we're being told how good it is for us, I suppose. Because, hey, everybody gets to keep their jobs while there are people getting sick. Otherwise, we would totally have to axe them, obviously. And also, everybody wants to be there, so what's the problem?
I think something to that point as well is there's this whole idea, I think, right now that people have that if people weren't going out partying and following all of the rules, we wouldn't be seeing any cases. But that's not necessarily the case. There's still a good chance that we would be seeing very big spikes, even if we didn't see them necessarily starting in kind of the party areas. We've already seen cases in freshman dorms. We've seen them in non-freshman dorms, and some of those haven't necessarily originated from people going out and partying. So I think it's also important that we bring attention to that, because there's no guarantee that even if people followed the rules to a T, we wouldn't still be in the same situation.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and just to kind of speak to both Brian and Kelly's point, when faculty push back, I mean, a lot of schools across the country are saying, well, students want to be back in person, right? That's what they want. And when faculty or the public start pushing back and asking for the data is never that good. One school said, well, they enrolled in classes, which is what students do, right? You can't not enroll in a class. Another school, and I apologize, I don't remember which school it is, just finally admitted, oh, we didn't hold a survey. We just are saying that this is what students want. And so you say this is what students want, and then you bring them to campus, and then schools, and Georgia Tech actually has been, the communication that I've seen from Georgia Tech has not been as bad as like Vanderbilt, some of the other schools that are like threatening to call the police on students who are going to parties and things like that. But it's yeah, I mean, it's some of these schools are just acting very poorly. Students want to be back. They've been selling students for their entire lives this college experience that includes partying. And then the minute some students do that, they turn around and they police it, and they blame them for all of the bad things that are going to come out of these inherently unsafe practices, right? Even if no student at Georgia Tech went to a single party or a single indoor bar, it would still probably transmit through the dorms, right? I mean, dorms, assisted living homes, cruise ships, that's where this stuff transmits very quickly. Yeah.
I'll jump in here as well. I think it's not just that students are doing what students do. The universities promised repeatedly that the intent was to give students the college experience. They always kind of add this little caveat. It's like, yeah, it's going to be different. But the thing is, like, they've consistently communicated to students over the summer that they're going to get the college experience, and they've attempted to communicate, I personally believe insufficiently, but that they are taking the health and safety of students seriously. But I don't think that that's the case. I think many of us would agree. And I think while several USG schools have not been as blatant in their kind of show of their complete just lack of any respect for students, as other schools that are kind of threatening students, is that they're telling faculty, they're telling graduate TAs not to communicate to students, saying, if you want to go online, we can have this class online. Or if the teacher or the professor decides to just teach remotely, they're being instructed either from the upper admin or from college level admin or even from departmental level admin not to communicate with students. So the universities are very much trying to control this narrative. They're saying, we've got this under control. We're taking this seriously. Here are all the things we're doing. The students are demanding that we return, blah, blah, blah. And they're listening, they're just refusing to listen to everything else. All the concerns that students have raised on social media, all the concerns that students and faculty and staff have raised at various protests, petitions over the summer, they're completely deaf to these things. And then UGA recently, with President Moorhead, one of the faculty senates, well, actually two of the faculty senates sent him resolutions, and he said, why am I just now hearing that faculty are concerned about the reopening plans now? And everyone is just like, what are you talking about? We've been airing our concerns since April, when the decision was made that we were going to reopen. And just to kind of back up, so before COVID, universities have been very willing over the past several decades, but especially the past decade, to shift responsibility onto students. I think that is most clear in the special institutional fee. I believe at Tech it's like $350 a semester or something like that. At UGA, $500. Okay, all right. So I think it went up. And at UGA, it's $450 a semester. And this fee was created in response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when the state revenues decreased, understandably. And this fee was supposed to die a natural death in 2012, but at that point, the Board of Regents decided to revisit it every year. And now universities have essentially become dependent on this, even though it's about I think at Tech, it's about almost 2.5% of Tech's annual kind of revenue. That's still several millions of dollars each year. And when students bring up kind of getting rid of this fee, that's what they say. We can't. This will result in layoffs. But rather than going back to the Board of Regents or going and lobbying in the State House and saying, hey, state revenues are back up to pre-2008 levels, why don't we kind of go back to the regular funding levels? On top of that, last November, we had some folks from the United Campus Workers of Georgia, some grad students, meet with Tracy Cook, who is the Senior Vice Chancellor of Business and Finance or something with the Board of Regents. And their funding formula was created in 1984 and has not been updated since. And it assumes that the state, on the per student cost of higher education, they assume that the state pays 75% of that. It is currently about 50-50. And that it was, I think, about 60-40 or so pre-2008. So that kind of marks the decade-long trend of the cost of higher education being shifted away from the public sector to students and their families. And that raises a whole other issue of equity and inclusion that COVID is just kind of exacerbating in many ways. So the short answer of that long kind of rant was no, I don't think that they have students' interests, whether they're health or financial well-being, anywhere near the top of their priority list.
I'd just like to add one more thing onto that. One thing I thought that you pointed out that was interesting was just the role of students and things and how that has continued to increase. And I don't think that's just from a financial perspective, but we've also started to see that this semester with, admin starting to bring students more and more into these roles of doing things like delivering meals to students in quarantine, managing lines. At one point, they were talking about having students transport other COVID positive students to quarantine housing. So I think that's another place where we started to see that dependence and that reliance on students increase a lot. And again, a lot of times with that, the safety of these students that they're bringing into these roles isn't necessarily being considered to its fullest. And there are also a lot of times when we've talked to them about why they're doing this, it's the answer that we get is we don't have the resources to hire full-time staff for these positions. So then you have to wonder, well, why are you hiring students if, like essentially taking advantage of that cheap labor that they have, that'll do it because they need the money for paying for classes and such.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and Bryant, please correct me if I have this wrong, but my memory of being a student at the time was that the '08 recession came on top of kind of stress test budget cuts to higher ed in Georgia from like the '07 budget. So like they cut to begin with, and then the recession came through and they had to cut on top of that. So I think it's sort of worth pointing out that the recession hit the budget, but the recession hit the budget in part because the politicians that make decisions in this state are philosophically inclined to hit the budget, right? And in fact, time is a flat circle now. I don't remember when, but early on in the in the pandemic, when the state was talking about these big 10, 15% cuts across the state budget, Brian Kemp said, this is a good thing. We're going to have to make decisions, right? I want to make decisions about what we need to spend our money on, and this is going to help us make those decisions. This sort of shift of financial responsibility from the state to the individuals and the lack of equity that brings with it are not merely sort of the result of chance, but like the result of a series of decisions made that really kind of go back to the Hope Scholarship. And I say this as a Hope Scholarship kid, like shout out to Hope Scholarship kids, but we paid for that with lottery money, right? I mean, it's one of the most regressive taxes you could build is to pay a need blind scholarship with lottery money. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to that issue. And we've kind of already touched on this, the idea of universities being run as a business. I'm wondering if anyone wants to kind of expand on that a little bit and how there's kind of a shift towards not necessarily education being the primary focus of an educational institution, but almost as if profits are the most important thing. And how does this affect like educators and students?
I think one just kind of example that is happening at this moment as well is you're talking about what is essentially a public service, and this conversation with higher ed and the conversation about the U.S. Postal Service and its profitability, its unprofitability misses the point. Higher education in general, so we're also seeing cuts to K-12 education in Georgia and throughout the country, to be honest, is these public services are meant to serve the public, right? But when you run state governments, when you run a federal government, or when you run higher education as a business, you're missing out. You're always going to face that issue of there are folks who get more out of this than they put in. And that's exactly what public services are meant to do. They're meant to serve the public and kind of level the playing field to some extent. And higher education has always been, has not always lived up to the promise of leveling the playing field. It has been very selective and prejudicial and kind of reinforcing of various systems of inequality. But theoretically, higher education is supposed to be an investment in the future. And we're not seeing higher education as an investment. We're seeing it as a short-term expense. How are we going to get more money out of these students? And I think that that kind of myopia is what we're seeing right now. When the university system of Georgia and these universities are deciding to reopen, they're saying, we need this fee money. And all they're doing is looking at the beginning of the semester. They're not thinking, or they're ignoring. I think they're very much thinking about it. They're ignoring willingly the rising cases in the state and in the country. They're ignoring that 4% of the world's population has 25% of the world's COVID cases. And they're looking at that short-term window of profits and losses. They're not thinking about when we will inevitably shut down and what that is going to do and how much it's going to extend the hurt. And I think that's what is, I think a lot of folks are in this moment for various different reasons coming to realize that this is actually kind of what capitalism is. And there's not this built-in system of efficiency and long-term profitability. It's always about the short term, okay? They will spend more money trying to do a stupid plan than they will to invest in a long-term plan that will have more sustainable results. It's all about that quick turnaround. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I think that was excellent. That was all great. I can tell you that as a faculty member, you're really not trained to think about this stuff. As a junior faculty member in particular, it's just the work. You just do the work. You don't pay attention to anything else. You stay away from any drama, politics, and so there's, Corey knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. But there's, from the bottom up, nobody's thinking this, right? Like the faculty are like, oh, got to go get that money out of those kids today. Like we're all about the kind of the cool stuff in academics that we all wanted to be about. But I can tell you, before, whenever they made the announcement that we were going back, I've never really felt like we were commodities until now. And that's very much a huge change in my relationship with the university system, is going from one of blissful naivete, and we're here making knowledge and learning and researching, to definitely a bit darker, more corporate kind of view about my role in this system and all of you as well, and what really matters. And it seems like, not us as humans. It seems like not the people we go home to after we get back from campus. And it definitely doesn't seem like the greater Atlanta area either, right? Because whatever we're doing here, I mean, those 30 fraternity brothers who are now quarantined this weekend, did they go anywhere? Like, probably, right? So in terms of our civic duty to the Atlanta, just greater area, being a commodity seems to be more important to folks, and it's definitely problematic in terms of just even my own personal relationship with where I'm working right now, and it's definitely on everybody's faces when they're walking around and when they're in meetings. This is weighing on people, and I would argue that the cost of $50 million is probably far smaller than the amount of damage that they're doing through the decisions that they're making in terms of time lost, and just stressing people the hell out, quite honestly.
I think too, so kind of on the auxiliary services side, so that dining, transportation, housing stuff, really a big problem that we run into and that we've seen in the past few years at Georgia Tech is once you get in that cycle of working with a private company, how hard it is to get out and start running your own services. So I don't know if y'all remember, but a couple years ago, we were going through the RFP or bidding process for our dining services on campus. We previously used Sodexo, and now we switched over to Aramark. But I sat in on those meetings, and it really stood out to me how often we spoke about, we really want to do our own dining, and we want to have Georgia Tech do our own thing because we've seen a lot of success from that, from other schools, but we don't have the capacity to do so because we're spending so much money on these private contracts, and so many resources keeping those up that we haven't built up the capital to be able to pay for or afford to do that for ourselves. So we get kind of stuck in this infinite loop. And now we're seeing that same exact thing happening with parking and transportation. We have, $300,000 in our reserves account, and that's it. That's not enough money to purchase our own fleet. So we're forced to work with a private company who can then provide a fleet for us. So I really think that's an interesting topic of discussion too, is that, and I don't think very many people know about that because we're required to have these reserves so that we're run as a business. But then through working with these private companies, it really keeps us from being a self-sustaining business. And we're really reliant on these outside sources for this. So yeah, I think that's an interesting topic as well. Just the idea that once you're in that loop, you really can't get out of it unless you really do a very cheap contract and suffer in terms of services for 10 to 15 years. And then are able to do your own thing. But at that point, then the conversation comes up of whether it's worth it.
Yeah, and just maybe to kind of close the loop on this, in some ways, like the optimistic vision of the university system that I think got a lot of us into grad school for years and years and years that Brian was talking about. Is a useful fiction for the business side. And when I think about why that Corvias document took off the way it did, I think it's because people aren't used to thinking about higher ed as a for-profit concern. And I as far as I can tell, and this is maybe to get at one of the questions that's popped up in the Q&A, I don't know that letter influenced USG at all, because I don't think it had to, right? USG was making these decisions with or without Corvias. But I think the public is so used to thinking about higher ed as this driver of equity, even though in reality, in many ways, it's not. That it's hard to break through that until you see this kind of like this email that reads like it was written by like a cartoon villain, right? And that's really what gets it through. Similarly, like Aramark and Sodexo, I sometimes teach the documentary 13th, and in that documentary, they talk about how these companies lobby for sweetheart deals in jails. And then my students come in and say, that's who feeds us. And suddenly, like they see Georgia Tech in this like new cynical way. Yeah.
All right, those were some great responses. And if anybody else wants to kind of jump on, I know we kind of just went into this question here in the Q&A that I think everybody should be able to see it now. And it's a more specific question about, what is the smoking gun for the Corvias documents? And if we have that actual transcript of the letter sent from Corvus to USG, if anyone has something to add to that.
I was assuming Kelly might have some comment on that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
read the news. That's
So the document that I obtained was kind of an agenda format, and it mentions a letter that was sent to the Board of Regents. I don't believe it has the specific letter. Actually, no, it does have the letter at the end. So I can just send. I'll type up the answer and just put a link to it. But I know there is further investigation being done on that front. But yeah, I'll send you the link as a response to your question.
I'll jump in really quickly. So yeah, I definitely encourage you to look at both the letter from Corvius as well as this kind of agenda conversation. I would honestly say focus even more on the agenda kind of conversation, because what the Board of Regents, shortly after this story broke and Rolling Stone and Inside Higher Ed and everything kind of wrote these reports on these documents that Kelly kind of unearthed with her FOIA request, was that, yeah, it didn't factor into our decisions. Or I think their official response was no universities. It wasn't factored into any individual universities' decisions. They didn't say that the USG considered it, because they did, as you can see in that agenda item. And I think what is most telling is they go back and forth over. So the letter basically, Corvius says that USG cannot make a unilateral decision that might impact Corvius financially without making Corvius whole financially. And the USG is kind of going through these possible legal options, and they're saying, okay, we can act unilaterally, but that will open us to legal dispute from Corvius. And there's always this hesitation when it comes to Corvius disputing it and suing the university for lost fees, or possibly even kind of going for even more money than they would have gotten just by charging fees at the regular rate. But near the end of this agenda item is something that might be more acceptable to Corvius, is getting residents to sign, residents of these Corvius housing units, to sign an acknowledgement of personal risk, or to deny any kind of refund. So it's get the money from the students and don't give it back to them, or let them take on the risk and say that they can't sue the universities or Corvius or something like that. So that, I think, gets at how willing they are to shift risks onto students, rather than standing up for students against huge billion-dollar corporations. And yeah, it's pretty infuriating. I think all this is, though, is evidence of what a lot of folks kind of always assumed was happening, but didn't have the quote-unquote smoking gun. I also think it's pretty telling and kind of contradicts the arguments that universities are making about students are demanding to come back. The official responses from Georgia State and a couple other places were that, yeah, this letter didn't factor into our reopening decision. And the reason was that so few people had registered for campus housing to begin with, so it made it a moot point. That's not an argument that you didn't take it into consideration. That's saying that folks are fucking scared to come back to campus. That's an acknowledgement of the exact opposite of what you've been claiming, that students are demanding to come back. Everybody wants this to happen. I think it's absurd how these folks' minds work.
Yeah, and the other thing that strikes me as interesting in that document, and this is a document that was created with the knowledge that it could become public, right? And in this agenda for the meeting, they have like Roman numeral 1 option, and the options are like, fill the dorms anyway, don't fill the dorms, and make core bias whole, or negotiate with core bias. If I'm making this document for this meeting, even if I didn't think it was going to happen, I would put Roman numeral 4, tell them to go to hell, and I'll see you in court. And it's just not even on, it's not even a consideration to just say no, right? But this, I want to bridge this to another question that's in the Q&A about kind of the process of getting this kind of information. Kelly, could you just tell us like how you went about requesting this document and what the back and forth with the USG is like, and how you managed to get this trove of documents from them?
Yeah, so it was actually pretty easy. I found a template for submitting an open records request online, just filled in the information and emailed it to, I think it's openrecords@usg.edu, something like that. But yeah, if anybody is ever interested in doing something similar or getting help, feel free to just message me on Twitter or anything like that. But yeah, I found a template, filled it out, emailed it to them, got a response that was like, your request isn't specific enough. So I went a little bit more in depth and just listed out a bunch of key terms that I wanted them to search for in Steve Wrigley's email. And they got back to me after I had to push them a little bit. I emailed them a couple of times, just say, hey, it's been a little bit since I've heard a response from you. Can you please get back to me? This is what Georgia law says, so I would appreciate it if you followed that. So just kind of a gentle nudge. But yeah, I mean, the person who I was in communication with was actually pretty good about getting back. So I encourage anybody who's interested in doing something like that to go for it. You know, if it's someone you know, reach out first and just ask for the information. But if you're having trouble, then you can submit an open records request. But yeah, if you Google Georgia open records request, there's some really good templates that you can use, and they give some good instruction on that.
I want to jump in really quickly. So on this point, I think Kelly kind of getting this open records request that shook the nation is, I think, something that we should all keep in mind. We are facing a lot of hurdles, okay, against these systems that are meant to benefit private corporate interests, okay? But we do have some power that we've kind of been able to work into the system. And I think on top of that, Kelly mentioned how she kind of had to retweak some keywords or some search words and stuff like that. What ultimately gives us more power, and I think I have become much more aware of this since I joined the United Campus Workers of Georgia, is it puts folks in communication at various different levels, grad students, faculty, staff. So we're hearing these stories, okay? We're talking to each other about all of this crazy stuff. So we know what's happening, and we can kind of, when we put in open records requests or FOIA requests, we know what keywords we want to include, whether it's the death of a housing employee at UGA or something like that. You want to be specific, but you also kind of want to know what you're asking for, but or what answers you're going to get before you even ask. Sometimes you can kind of uncover something that you weren't anticipating, but this is what I think a lot we need to take from this open records request that Kelly made, is that we have some power, we got to use it, and we got to do it together. So that's my pitch for solidarity and kind of working together against the evil corporations.
And I will say, if you do submit an open records request, cast a wide net. It's very easy. They ask for such specific information that it's hard to do that. But definitely try to include as many possible parameters as you can to really try to get as much information as you can out of it. A lot of times, as you said, you're not going to know what you're looking for. So by doing that, you'll potentially end up running across something that otherwise you may not have done. So definitely just put as many terms in there, even if you think they're ridiculous, because it's better to have too much information than not enough.
Yeah, and I'll just say one, not to accuse USG of anything, but one strategy that people responding to open records requests will employ if they don't want you to find things is they'll just send you everything and make you fish, but put it in a Google Drive and put it up on Twitter, and there's plenty of people who will help you dig through it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked what you said there, Ryan, about us leveraging what little power we have can actually be effective. So just want to remind all the attendees that you can ask questions in the Q&A. So just put them in there if you have any questions. I'm going to go to the one from the anonymous attendee because just to do that one. And it says, is there a danger of further privatization with the shifts in campus structure and organization under COVID? Which is a very important question. I'll just throw it out there.
Short answer is yes. It's so there's a phrase of never let a good crisis go to waste. And conservatives, the ones who have been all too willing to cut budgets as much as possible, are very good at exploiting a crisis. It's something that they will do regardless, but when a crisis comes along, it just gives them the fuel. At that point, it's a quote unquote necessity. It's never a necessity for them to raise taxes on corporations, but I think it's telling that Georgia, for instance, is is consistently kind of ranked one of the top states for business, but we're some of the worst affected when it comes to public health. And I think that and just education in general at times is, those things are very much correlated.
Sorry, I lost where I wanted to start this. Give me just a second. In preparation for this, I was looking back over some of the reporting on the core bias deal back in 2014 when it happened. And the chancellor at the time said this is the first step in getting USG out of the dorm business. I mean, none of these things are the end stop, right? This is a progress. And, just a couple of months ago, our Georgia Tech's outgoing provost, Raphael Braus, wrote in his blog about his vision for a post-COVID Georgia Tech. And my colleague, Alexander Edwards, had a great, she live tweeted this document. If you haven't seen her thread, go find it. But it's, her Twitter name is @nonmodernist. But I mean, it's these private-public partnerships. That is his vision for the future of Georgia Tech, which, even a charter school, he imagines like a charter school right on the edge of Georgia Tech, which, is not what the area around Georgia Tech needs. So yeah, I mean, no one is pretending this isn't the future of the university in Georgia.
All right, so moving to this next question, just pretty short. Let me so is it true that no upper administration officials at USG schools have taken any pay cuts since March? This has happened at other schools and university systems.
I vaguely remember something about that months ago when the furloughs were announced. When furloughs were taken off the table, though, I'm still not clear why that is. And I'm assuming the cuts went with it to Administrator Corsano. The last time I saw a rough line item budget for the cuts that the USG system was making, I can tell you that there were no admin cuts that stood out to me. They were all at the a lot of them were at the super low level about consolidating small programs and services and stuff like that. Definitely nothing about the football teams either. That being said, there might be a cut that I'm not aware of. That I don't have a definitive.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything publicly announced about upper admin cuts. I would be surprised, honestly, if it did happen. I'm not 100% positive on this. I could very well be wrong, so don't hold me to it. But I believe part of the CARES Act money that the USG got, one of the kind of requirements is that there be no furloughs. So I think that was one of the reasons why the furloughs were taken off the table. But that could have also been because they didn't have to cut what they were initially thinking of the 14%. They only cut like around 10%. So maybe they did something that way. But
For now.
for now.
For now.
Something else that you mentioned, the football team. So something else that's interesting too is because we operate so many services as almost individual business units, we can't really shuffle around money to make sure that, you know, if one is failing, we can help out another. And again, we've seen that in parking and transportation. They have almost no money, but, you know, housing has tons of money because they weren't responding to certain maintenance requests for 10 years and they got a $10 million, you know, revenue increase because of it. So I think that's an interesting point too, because I think a lot of times we have this idea that, you know, if housing has a lot of extra money, why don't they help out transportation? Or if athletics has a lot of extra money, why don't they use that money for faculty? And I think that brings up a whole nother set of issues, but I just think that's another strange aspect of everything kind of being run as individual businesses.
I'll add just a broader version of this kind of unit level stuff at individual colleges. Within the university system of Georgia, there are some schools that are much better off financially than others. So Georgia Tech, like, we're very much consistently kind of in the black. We look good, but there are some universities that are not as fortunate. They don't have as many kind of foundation former donor or alumni donors and stuff like that. They're much smaller operations, which makes the idea of running them like a business all the more challenging. And that's one of the things that kind of really rocks the boat, and I think kind of makes it difficult when you're trying to run the entire system as a business. And when you get these answers of like, it's a qualitative decision rather than a quantitative decision, is that the university system of Georgia is having to kind of take what can some of these less well-off universities handle. They're having to take those considerations in mind. And it's those considerations shouldn't have to be considered, but that's the consequence of running this like a business.
All right. Okay. So we're good answers. So I have another question here, and it's kind of it's essentially connected to that same administration question. And there's been no pay cuts that we can name offhand, and I wonder if this is connected to the fact that there seems to be very, very little pushback on USG by individual institutions. I'm wondering if maybe Dr. McGurko, if you know about any GT attempts to like push back against USG or anything like that.
I mean, I'm not on the inside with those decision makers, so I can only tell you what's been said. And there's been nothing contrary to the USG that's been said. You know, we definitely have been told we're being forced to do this, and then very much our hands are tied. Let's make the best of the situation, and that's where it sort of stops. But there seems to be very much an acceptance of kind of the the role that our university plays in this much larger system. If I had my druthers, we would have folks who were a little bit more vocal, maybe a little less afraid to lose their job, quite honestly, and to even just literally come out and say this is a bad idea, but we have to do it. But USG is making us, and this is really wrong. But I wish I could say I've heard something of the sort from the folks kind of at the top of these things, but the most that I can tell you is that I hear there are a lot of anguishing or a lot of conversations that cause a lot of anguish in these meetings on a weekly basis. That there's a distinct invisible hand that's moving things that faculty cannot identify or address, for the simple reason we don't know why we're actually being made to come back to campus, right? Like, we can be told, oh, it's because students want it, oh, it's because $50 million, but as evident by the conversation here, that's very, very, very unlikely to be the actual whole picture of what's going on. And just not knowing, I feel like, is it's a huge stress on everyone. And it would be nice if we could see our leadership actually, show us some leadership.
It's interesting too, because a lot of times when I've called certain admin, I won't name names here, but there have been admin that I've called and said, is this decision a USG decision? It's not a good one, but is this a USG decision or a Georgia Tech decision? And the answer that I've consistently gotten is, I can't tell you that, or I can't speak on that. But without necessarily a reason given. And I do think that there is this large fear factor associated with losing jobs or facing some sort of retaliation for that. But one thing I do want to touch on, because I remembered you saying this earlier, but I wanted to talk about this, was this whole idea that students want to come back to campus. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bullshit answer. I mean, I think to an extent students do want to come back. There are some students who want to come back more than others. But I think what we're seeing is that the students who are being given a voice in these conversations, a lot of times are going to be the types of students who do want to come back. And that is causing a very large divide right now in student leadership. There's pretty much split 50-50. I think probably how admin is, how it's happening on that side as well. But I think the voices that they tend to be hearing from students and a lot of people who have been reaching out are those who are very much of the opinion that we should be back on campus, and how can we make that happen. So yeah, I think it's interesting that they're using that to kind of excuse these things, but I could see that they're really getting 50-50 and just kind of.
I mean, to be fair, I bring that up not as, it could be 60-40, it could be 70-100, well, like whatever, right? There are faculty that want to be on campus too, right? My viewpoint is that there are people who are entrusted with the well-being of our university that are supposed to be looking out for us. And, as individuals, we're not all on the right? Like, there are faculty who have differing opinions about what it means to be back on campus, just as there are students. That doesn't mean that science and medical research doesn't tell us and even experts on our campus, like we objectively know, we don't need this, qualitative kind of line for when it's safe or not. We know. And we know that we're being led into an unsafe situation. We know, right? Yeah, so it feels very much not so much as like how many students want to come back. It's more that the ones that want to come back those are the ones that need to be kept off, quite honestly, because they're the ones who aren't necessarily even taking this as seriously. Just like those, the people who are sitting without masks at the coffee shop today that I went to, I don't want to be around those people because clearly they don't take this as seriously as I do. So this is what I mean by I'd like our leaders to lead a little bit more and actually own the responsibility of this large organization. and make just like the only good decision for us as a collective and as a community.
And I would just say, what it means to be on campus, and why a person wants to be on campus means different things for different people. And so I think, I don't think students, if there's a student at Vanderbilt, for example, who wanted to be on campus, I don't think they made that decision knowing that Vanderbilt was going to threaten to call Nashville police on them if they got together on the quad, right? Like that wasn't in the brochure that went out with registration materials. But there are people who need to be on campus for a lot of complicated reasons. There are people who
Absolutely.
would be safer on campus, right? An early question that we answered was, is the administration meeting our needs? And we all have very different needs, right? And the problem with the sort of top-down USG approach is that it doesn't give us the flexibility to respond to those needs. And, a student who needs to be in the dorm because their home is unsafe, or because their home life is unstable, or because they're an international student, right? They would be safer in that dorm if it wasn't filled with other students who have to be there because they have 2 classes that are hybrid, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
This is the thing that drives me nuts, is that another false argument that I've been given is that, well, some people need to be on campus, so we have to have the campus open, which blows my mind, right? Why not let those people be here and keep them safer by not having Spanish being taught down the hall or whatever, right? Like, I mean, clearly if we even just got vacated housing on campus, just in and of itself, but only the people that need to be there, just that, it would make a huge difference. But even tied up in this is the notion of, especially for staff and faculty and graduate students, that notion of choice that we're given, right? So I'm a full professor. I'm in a world, a different world than I was 10 years ago. If this were 10 years ago, I was told I could come to campus, I would definitely be weighing, well, like, man, I got to get tenure, but I might die, or somebody I know might because I went, but it probably won't happen. And even being forced to make that decision, right? Like graduate students are like, my advisor wants me to come in. I don't know, I don't feel comfortable, but I don't know how to say no because my advisor is super famous. It can just maybe get me off of a paper if they're ticked at me. There is a huge culture in our university that honestly has been dysfunctional before this, but more now than ever, we're really seeing this notion of how the power structure or the power dynamics in the university work, and who's shoving who in front of them, quite honestly. And obviously it's staff and graduate students, it feels like, who are especially on the front lines. But if our leaders would just say, hey, prove that you need to be on campus, then this solves it. Like literally everything we are discussing goes away, except for maybe that $50 million that they have to figure where to get it from. So that's where I always get stuck on this, is why can't we just do what I thought we had peer institutions like Carnegie Mellon and MIT. I'm not sure where their peers, quite honestly, at this moment, given that they're doing the intelligent and smart thing for their campuses, which is just prove you need to be there. Instead of proving that, you need to be home during a global pandemic in one of the worst hotspots in the country, prove that you need to be on campus instead. And otherwise have people stay home. But I feel like that's exactly right. There are people that need housing. There are people for a wide variety of reasons, right? It could be I live in rural Georgia and I don't have access to internet, right? It could be whatever. But there are a huge variety of problems that, actually have to be solved, rather than, like you said, somebody is taking 2 hybrid classes and they, want that college experience, so they come and live in a dorm.
And the thing about that too is they've already done that. They've already figured out who needs to be on campus, at least on this
Oh yeah.
in the spring. So logistically, it's almost nothing for them to do that. But logistically for them to do what they're doing now has been a complete nightmare, and has caused so much confusion as we're seeing now. So I think that's a great point. I think it would have been so much easier for them to just be like, new students, tell us if you need to be there and we'll figure you out. Everybody else, just stay online and we can do that exceptionally well. But instead we're doing everything at like a 3 out of 10 right now, and it's just, and if we get sent home, it's going to be even worse. So
When?
yeah.
I mean, there's no if, right? Is anyone under the delusion that we're going to last until Thanksgiving? I mean, just.
I say if because I don't trust the Board of Regents to send us home, even if we see everybody getting cases. So.
A graduate student in my program had the over/under at 2 weeks. I think that was pretty smart. I've been saying October 1st at the latest, because I feel like things will move so slowly in terms of decisions. But quite honestly, the NBC Nightly News segment that was just aired from Georgia Tech's campus, that might have an effect on this week, quite honestly.
I'll jump in and just kind of give my unfiltered honesty. I think that the legitimate concerns that we're bringing up about internet access, safety, as far as home life goes, I think the administrators are quick to point that out as an excuse. I think it's purely a bait and switch. I honestly do not believe that they care about students with any issues in that regard. That's just my opinion based on experience. To get back to the original question about like why hasn't there been any kind of administrative pushback, I think they totally agree with what the university system is doing. I don't think that they have any qualms with the decision that the decision that has been made, and I think that's evidenced by the letter that all but I believe 1 or 2 university presidents sent to the University System of Georgia, praising their leadership and the unity of the Board of Regents' kind of decision-making power, the top-down. And this was after folks had been kind of pleading for weeks to issue a mask mandate. The reason we're not seeing pushback is because they don't think that there's any problem with the reopening plans. And if they do, they are perfectly willing to pass the buck on to higher ups, just as they are at several other universities. And to be honest, I think we will see soon if university presidents and administrators haven't learned the lessons from their colleagues at Vanderbilt and William and Mary and everything. They're going to push it down. They're very quick. They want to praise themselves and take credit for anything good that happens. But anything bad that happens is completely out of their hands. It's either the students didn't follow our very clear guidelines, or the Board of Regents, they have to make the call. It's a system-wide decision. That's what I think. That's why there hasn't been any administrative pushback.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I brought up people who might be safer on campus in no way to defend the reopening plan. But yeah, I think, at some point you have to take people at their word. And, anytime that President Cabrera wants to show us what he's been doing behind the scenes to make us safer, I'd be happy to listen, but it hasn't happened yet.
All right, so we are almost out of time here. So Brett's question is a really good wrap up, I think. And it says, what is it going to take for us to reverse the trend of privatization in USG and reassert our collective control of our universities as students, faculty, and campus workers? And I just want to plug something here really quick that YDSA has been doing. I'm going to send this petition in the chat to everybody. It's #CoronaStrike, essentially for students to refuse to attend their in-person portions of their hybrid classes, which are usually unnecessary or dangerous. So please sign that if you have not already seen it, or share with your friends. So that's one way, I guess. But anyone else?
I just typed out my answer, which I think Brett actually knows the answer to already. But we can't work collectively without being a collective, right? And I applaud the student groups that like the YDSA that have been organizing. There's a faculty organization, the AAUP. But quite honestly, everybody in one central collective that reflects what the campus actually is, which is we're all walking by each other all the time. And what affects one group of us affects the rest of us. I urge people to check out the United Campus Workers website, which I posted in the chat. And honestly, if you have concerns, these are organizations like this are very bottom up, where they're driven by the members' concerns. I joined in March when I started, thinking things were a little weird with this pandemic. And I can tell you that it's been an incredibly responsive environment for me to really feel like I had people around to support the problems and concerns that I was seeing. And it gave me an opportunity to learn more about what was going on and the other issues that were affecting especially staff and students on campus. So check out that website. And for those who are off of Georgia Tech, there are units at your universities as well. Chapters.
Yeah, I would just say, one of the things that has been hopeful these past few weeks is seeing the solidarity between faculty, staff, and students, and really especially seeing the actions of students, right? Kelly's FOIA but we've been laughing about UNC and our numbers being past UNC. UNC shut down like a day or maybe 2 days after the student newspaper ran an editorial with the headline, we have a clusterfuck on our hands, and this got national news, yeah. Right? It's the students who are really moving the needle on this stuff, and that's pretty exciting. And I say, keep doing it. If students won't show up to hybrid classes, we can't have hybrid classes.
I need to get going, folks, but I thank you, especially to the YDSA, for letting me be a part of this. And if anybody has anything that they want to talk to me about, please feel free to reach out to me, especially if you're at Georgia Tech on the Microsoft Teams. You can just shoot me a message. But I need to run. Thank you all so much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just kind of up the United Campus Workers of Georgia. And I don't want to add too much to this, but what we're saying is a lot of folks are scared to speak up for various different reasons, whether it's the fear of getting fired or disappointing, if you're a grad student or something like that, disappointing your advisor who may not have the same feelings as you. There are several different kind of concerns that folks have. And when you come together in forums like this in the United Campus Workers of Georgia, you're figuring out that you're not alone. And then on top of that, when you decide to act, you have other folks behind you. And it's at the end of the day, and I don't think we're necessarily at this point with the United Campus Workers of Georgia, but at the end of the day, they can't fire everybody. And students, I think, especially undergraduates, if we want to use the fact that universities are running like a business against them, you guys are the source of revenue. Increasingly, you guys are the source of revenue. And that gives you guys a lot of power. It's not as much as you should have. It's not as much as any of us should have, but just, yeah, you guys have power, and that comes from talking, from meeting together, organizing together. Organize, organize, organize. That is, I think, the bottom line.
Yeah, on that note, for any students who are interested in getting involved in this kind of thing, highly encourage you to look into advocacy organizations that exist on your campuses. At Georgia Tech, we have RHA on the housing side. We have student government, which has undergraduate House of Representative applications open now. I think they just updated the website with that link. So I highly encourage you to check that out. I'm also working on a new advocacy organization. If any of y'all are interested in that, feel free to reach out to me directly and I can get y'all added. But on any campus, I think there are a lot of ways to get involved, and a lot of it is just about connections, about who you know, about information flow between people. A lot of times one person will know something very important, and if you can get that out and really spread that, you can see big changes happening. But definitely be vocal. If you're in a position of leadership, don't be afraid to speak out. We see this too on the student side. A lot of students are really trying to, become the next student body president or things like that, and they're afraid that by being vocal, they'll lose out on their chance. But do it because you're passionate about it and because you want to see a positive change happen, not just for your resume. So yeah, definitely encourage any and everybody to try to get involved in as many ways possible.
All right, well, we are out of time, but that was a wonderful discussion, very informative. And I just want to thank all of the panelists for coming, and we really appreciate all of your time for participating in this event and your knowledge and insights. So with that, I think this event is done. Just reminding, I put this in the chat right now, but this whole event is posted on, or will be posted on, the YDSA GT YouTube account, which I linked to there. So if you missed a portion of it, or you want to share it with one of your friends or something, send them the link and they can watch it. So thank you everybody for attending. And I hope we can work towards a better solution than what is going on right now. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for, yeah, thanks for having us and for organizing.